Welcome to Brave Inflections. My name is Claudelle von Eck. I'm the founder of Brave Inflections. Thank you very much for visiting the website and to watching this video. I have a very exciting guest with me, Priscillah Mabelane. This is the second conversation about leadership that I'm having with her. She has a wealth of experience. She's currently the Executive Vice President of Sasol energy business for Sasol. I got that right, eh? Because your title is a mouthful, Priscilla. And she really has been around the block as a leader and somebody I have a lot of respect for, and this is why I've asked her to come onto this platform to have this conversation with me. Priscilla, before I jump into my questions, can I just ask you to just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Claudelle. I'll start where you started. I'm currently working for Sasol, which is, as we all know it, is an iconic brand in Southern Africa. And previously, I was with BP for just under a decade in different roles, but I joined them as a CFO and moved into their operations. And then by the time I left, I was the CEO of the Southern Africa business. I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I did my articles with Ernst & Young, and I've also worked for a number of other companies. I have two beautiful daughters. I think in our last discussion, I mentioned to bring my daughters into the conversations as well. And also two boys that are my partner's kids as well. So really, that's who I am. Just
So
hopefully give
quite
a
an
good
accomplished
overview of who
woman.
I am.
You've been in these fantastic senior roles. You have been not just here in South Africa and the UK, and you're a mother. I have got no idea how you do all of that. I do encourage people to first go and listen to the other video because our conversation is carrying on from that video, although the questions that I'm going to pose to Priscilla in this video are standalone, but it would be good for you just to get that background in terms of the previous conversation. So Priscilla, if we were to look into a crystal ball and we were to gaze into the future, and I mean, these days it's very difficult to predict the future, as we've now realized as well, as we're going through the effects of the pandemic that we're in. But your predictions around how you see leadership changing in the future?
Thanks, Claudel. I think previously when we spoke on the previous session, I spoke about the disruption of technology and digital as something that is really, we have to embrace, but that embracement also comes with multiple changes for us. Those of us who come from the old school, we still have control of our own resources. We still have control over oversight. We have management performance systems that are so process driven, and we controlling people through dictating or setting goals rather than inspiring and innovation as well, while being clear around the frames they need to operate within. So all of those things are going to be disrupted and are actually starting to be disrupted because you have to work with a lot of resources that some of those might not be what you control. There are concepts around crowdsourcing, ecosystems, and partnerships in terms of how you play in terms of that. So that requires a different approach and mindset. A young talent wants to work wherever they want to work. They want to be measured on output, not the input. And how do we adapt in terms of those and to make sure that you can leverage on building the capabilities that your organization needs to have to be able to forge and leverage on that broader ecosystem, but equally so inspiring that talent that is going to be niche and will continue to compete for, to come and work for you. So what would be a value proposition to someone to be work for you as an organization, but for you as an individual as well?
So then, and what you're talking about there is your ability to adapt, but also to be able to see all these moving parts. and they're somewhere out there in the cloud, and you can't always see all these moving parts. And I think, especially for people who have very controlling personalities, that's probably a big challenge. That realizing that as a leader, leadership no longer means, or will no longer mean, that you are controlling everything, that you can directly control everything. But let's move to female leadership. And you as a woman, so one of the things that one often hears is women saying that it's very difficult for them in leadership roles, to excel in leadership roles, because they just find these red herrings that are not necessarily there for their male counterparts. So what do you say? What are those things, and how do you deal with those? The things that make it difficult for women to excel in leadership positions.
I'm going to talk from a South African perspective in terms of my personal experience and what I've seen as well. I think the first barrier for me is around cultural barriers. And I say cultural because being a Black female, when you get married, or even if you're not married, when you're in society, there are certain additional burden. And I call them burden or expectations because that's what our society has put in place that requires from me as an individual. And I usually say to people, you'll be surprised that over the weekend I had to go and be with my in-laws and cook because there was a function. And by the time I come back, I have to read a pack and be prepared for a board meeting on Monday. So understanding that when you have a diverse team, there are those cultural, societal barriers that people are dealing with every day. And on weekends, on a daily basis, they have to balance with how they preserve energy to contribute to the organization becomes quite important. The second part is around bias, and there's a dialogue around unconscious bias or conscious, I don't know what it is. I just know there's a lot of bias. And this is part of how we work because we just feel comfortable with the people that look like us, that talk like us, and that we know. And that's the reality that you have to forge. And history over time may have been dominant in operating in the corporate world because women were staying at home, raising families, because it's very difficult, as you'll know. So how do you then ensure that as a leader, you're mindful of that inclusivity? Because it's not about diversity, and I always call both of them, because it's easy to say we need female or we need gender or we need a race into it, or even diversity of views is important. But do we understand how, when you have it, how do you make sure it's inclusive and you can tap into that inclusivity? I think that's something that is very difficult for women. And then as a result of that, there aren't enough role models that they can look up to and that can sponsor. There isn't enough voice when you're sitting in the boardrooms and the biases kick in, leadership expectations, performance attributes are discussed because they're all seen from a group thinking perspective. So how do we challenge ourselves to break those barriers? And this then gets entrenched into our recruitment processes, our talent management processes, and how we then sponsor talent, and even how we engage with external parties, because we should not forget the sourcing part. When you have a team of professionals that you want to appoint as a leader, for example, who are you more inclined to recruit, to advise you, or to be on your panel? And these are the reality that we're faced with as women.
And then as you were talking, I was reminded of our previous conversation in the other video, where we talked about that understanding that we need to ensure that as leaders that we're balanced in our contribution. So that we're not so focused on the organization that we forget our leadership role in society and as parents, and making sure that we raise adults that would be able to contribute positively to the collective. But what you're saying now is as well as focusing on the inverse as well, so as society, we need to have very deep conversations around how do we, in what we're expecting from women, contribute to their ability to be strong leaders in the context of organizations and in the corporate world, or whether you're an organization in the public sector. So is it right of us to still have those old expectations of women in the household, and be completely blind to the vacuum that we're creating in the organizational context, with the women not being able to bring to the table that they should be able to, that they should bring, so that we can have that balance as well between the male and female energies within the organizational context. And that is, I think it's these are deep conversations that we need to have, because we take a lot
I
of things
agree.
for granted, eh?
Yeah, we
Um,
do.
so one of the things that I've been struggling with in my head, and I'd like to hear your views on this. I remember a few years ago, I was in a radio interview, and the presenter asked this question of me, and as have you found it more difficult in leadership as a female or a person of color? And I've had debates with and I think of about one particular debate with a black male friend of mine, talking about the biggest issues in South Africa. And his view is that racism is the biggest issue in South Africa. And I keep on saying, no, it's not the only big issue. Sexism, for me, is the same as racism, and we've got to address both. And because you don't experience sexism, you don't see that it's just as harmful, and in some cases even more. If we think about gender-based violence in
Yeah.
our context. So let me ask you this question: what has created more obstacles for you, being black or being female?
I would say it's been a black female. It's even worse. And I always look at this in a waterfall, to say who is at the top and who's at the bottom. So, whilst females as a criteria category at the bottom, we also ranked at the bottom. So, white females are likely to be more successful than a black male. And a colored female and an African female are probably always going to be at the bottom, because you'll have a white female, Indian female, and this is South Africa, and that's the reality of what you're facing. After the male has been considered, then you get to the bottom. And the reality with this is you just need to look at the statistics. They're sobering. I remember in my previous discussions and my role in BP, and my team was saying, yeah, but Priscilla, you are pushing us hard on the gender, and the female gender. And I said, yes, I am, because when you look at the need to address the inequalities, this is where, and this were black males. I give them the data, because they're saying just by talking about it and challenging us, you're bringing your biases into it. And that was the dialogue around my own biases. And I said, I would agree with you if the numbers were showing that. So until your mindset and your heart attract that, the stats are showing predominantly senior roles, white males, followed by, in most companies, white females. And then it will be black males, which will be the whole category, and black females at the bottom.
And so there has to be a leveling of the playing field, right? So you've mentioned, the conversations with the black male leaders. So generally speaking, what would you say are the things that male leaders need to do to contribute to leveling that playing field?
I think first of all, and people have heard me before say this, there has to be an intent at the highest level of any business and by the executives of those business. And that intent needs to be followed by action, and you have to live by it. And then you need to understand your biases and be open about them and understand when they get in the way. Because you can't follow through on your intent if your biases are getting in the way and your actions will not demonstrate that. So for me, those are the key three things that if we get right, we will see a lot of change.
And
There's all the
maybe
sponsorship.
absolutely, and maybe at the heart of that is also your ability to tap into empathy. And I always feel that it is so easy to allow your biases to overpower that intent that you're mentioning. Um, if you objectify the other person and not apply empathy. So if you were in the shoes of Priscilla, the Black female, and you have the ability to think through, how would I feel if I were in her shoes, if I were ranked right at the bottom and not being given the opportunity? Because clearly Priscilla is a bright woman. She's a chartered accountant. She has the leadership qualities that you need. But she has to jump through all these hoops. She's got all these obstacles. But if I look at her with empathy as another human being, it should be easier than to check your own biases and to deal with them.
I can't agree with you less on that, but also to set that intent. Because if you don't have the empathy to the impact of the societal divides, you will not even see the need to be intentional about it. You see it as a compliance agenda.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think the biases tend to harden when people feel
Yep.
it is forced on them, as opposed to being able to honestly, with yourself first, being honest and honestly look at what is right, because there are ethical implications in that, isn't that? So if
Down.
you are not able to see that the playing field is not leveled and that
Mm,
you are contributing negatively to that playing
mm,
field. And then negative contribution is not always about your actions, it's also about your inaction. That there are
mm,
ethical implications in that.
mm. And it's also about anecdotal things. The other day I was talking to a very good friend of mine who's her and I experience similar things now and then, and we share. And we're talking about body language
Mm,
as a big instrument in destroying confidence in people
yeah.
in any organization. And it was those type of things that if you don't have that empathy to say, when Claudelle is speaking, how do I respond? What comes to my mind? Am I in the room? Am I present? Am I engaging? And these are tough questions. And as leaders, we do this every day without even realizing our impact.
Yeah. So you almost need to constantly work on yourself, to ensure that you're always present and to check yourself, to you watch yourself as an actor in a play, and
Yes.
seeing how are you reacting. And then especially when you see that there are differences in your responses based on the gender or the race in front of you, that you need to ask yourself very serious questions. But you can't see that if you are not present, if you're not very consciously looking at yourself and asking yourself, how am I responding? What vibe am I giving off? To use colloquial term there. So, but let's we talked about the males, right? So let's inverse it and ask this question: what are the kinds of things that you think that female leaders need to do to bring about a more equal society?
I think it's even more challenging for me, female leaders. First, for me, what I found was courage. And there's because once you have the courage, then you can set your intent and then you can act. So I've listened to a number of people that I mentor, coach, but also I like creating dialogue sessions in every business that I work in. And you'll find that most of the time people talk about this sisterhood fight or whatever. It's got so many connotations depending on which language you want to use. But for me, simplicity, science. And I usually say to people, it's all about the courage to be different, to challenge the status quo and set the intent and drive it. So I think for me, that's the first part, is that courage that you got, but also confidence that you got into this role, not because there was a compliance agenda you needed to fill that, because you are capable, and then have the courage to change the status quo. I actually say, you know what, I'm not so sure what the worst thing for me that can ever happen if I challenge anything on diversity and inclusion. Probably I'll lose my job. So what? I suppose I have the luxury to do whatever I want to do with myself at this age. But it's that level of confidence that it's better than my sleepless nights. When I see that behavior getting in the way and I'm shortening my lifespan, I might have to downgrade my quality of life, but at least I would be whole. And that's really that purpose. Who are you as a female leader? What is the difference you want to make in life? What is the legacy you want to leave behind? And that will then give you the opportunity to be courageous.
And courage is really important. I fully agree with you. I do think that we probably are not having enough of those conversations to tell people that you need to be courageous, that courage is required of you, that when you're, especially when you're in a leadership role, but also at the same time, making sure that people understand that when you display courage, you must almost expect that there are going to be times when you are going to encounter resistance. But you need to understand that everything comes with a price tag. If you are not courageous, as you said, there is a price tag to that. If you are courageous, there is a price tag that comes with that as well. But which one of the two carries the heavier penalty if one looks at the bigger picture? You look at a collective, you look at the future, you look at what we're creating for the next generation. And then the ethical implications there as well. As much as we talked about ethical implications when I asked the question about male leaders, the ethical implications as well for female leaders. And so if you don't play the role that you're supposed to play, you are creating a vacuum, and that vacuum has a ripple effect and it affects people's lives.
It's a missed opportunity. I agree with you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's an issue of personal interest. As I said, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's I lose my job.
Yeah.
Or is it an issue of can I live with the impact on Claudelle? And it goes back to empathy.
Yeah.
Will it give me sleepless nights? If you're like me, I wouldn't sleep.
Mm.
And the consequences on my health are much more, but also on who I am. And what will I regret in 2 years' time when I reach that age of 60 and I retire and I look back, or I'm on a deathbed? And in my mind, it's very clear.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But it does also take a level of maturity and to have that kind of conversation in terms of what is the legacy that I want to leave behind? And also, I think what has happened over time, which is very regrettable. So if I were to just look at it at the South African context, is that it seems to me that we've lost a lot of that African humanism that speaks to I understand with absolute clarity that I'm not an island, that I'm connected to others, that
Yeah.
my decisions and my actions and my inaction affects other people around me. And when I understand that with clarity, as you said, you can't sleep at night when you have a negative impact on other people. So let me ask you this last question, last bit of wisdom that I want to extract from you, and that is, what would the advice be that you would give today for aspiring leaders?
I think it's clarity of purpose.
And it's if you talk about clarity of purpose, the one thing that I often find in my coaching practice is that people find it very difficult to understand this concept of purpose. And sometimes I find that people connect purpose to financial success,
Yeah.
or success in the sense of being a celebrated leader that everybody knows about. Can you just tease out a little bit in terms of when you talk about purpose, what does that mean for you?
I think I mentioned this probably just in passing in so my purpose is to use every opportunity I get to better someone's life, because I do believe I have the capability to contribute, and I've contributed that, and economically to shape the organization, to make a success out of it. And as someone who's very, very driven, but I'm in that role to make a difference and leave a better legacy. And that talks to my own family. You'll find that I'm very family oriented in terms of how I look at my parents, my siblings, my kids, and then the broader society as well. And particularly my team, they're my family as well. So I really push myself hard to say, if someone has worked for me, their life better be better off after that. And if I have an opportunity like that, like what Sasal has provided me today, I don't want, when I retire, to sit back and say, she's delivered the successful business, she's shaped this. That's fine, they can talk about that. But what really matters is, what legacy am I leaving for people who's better because I had a privilege to benefit from their contribution. And that, for me, that's what matters the most.
Music to my ears. We 100% on the same page. I mean, for me as well, the purpose is a very simplistic statement in terms of me as a being in the collective, as opposed to connecting it to a role or a career. Right. So if you know what your purpose is, then when the opportunities come along, you look at whether that opportunity matches your purpose, and gives you the opportunity to live your purpose, then that is a good connection. And that is a wonderful point for us to stop this conversation on. I really, really appreciate the fact that you once again so generously shared your thoughts and your wisdom with us. There are so many things in this conversation that's probably going to keep me awake tonight as I'm thinking and reflecting. Because in every conversation, one always thinks about, okay, so what am I taking away from this, and where do I need to adjust in my life? So, and I hope that everybody who's watched this video have been able to pick up the nuggets from the conversation with Priscilla. Um, and also, I encourage you, as I said right at the beginning, please go and watch the other video as well, because that one is also full of lots of nuggets. I encourage you to look at the rest of the website, the other conversations, and lots of different posts on there that you can learn from. Priscilla, once again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for being so generous and so open and willing to share those deep thoughts with us. I've learned a lot from you today. Thank you.